During the Cold War, we built satellite systems, radar networks, and early warning infrastructure to detect nuclear weapons before they reached us. We understood something simple. The ability to see a threat early is itself a form of power. Today, the threat landscape is shifting again. With advances in AI, bioengineering, and global connectivity, the next major shock to a supply chain may not start with a tariff, a port closure, or a new export restriction. It may start with a pathogen moving quietly around the world. An outbreak in a mining corridor, a disease tearing through a facility that makes the components the modern economy runs on. And this isn't science fiction. The US and its allies are pouring billions into critical mineral supply chains in places like Congo, where an Ebola outbreak is threatening to shut down the mines we need to build iPhones, missiles, and cars. And detecting this kind of invisible risk requires a new kind of intelligence. It's called biointelligence, the ability to spot biological threats before they reach our factories, our borders, our supply chains, and our military bases. My guest today helped create it. Matt McKnight is building the infrastructure for this new era. He is the founder and CEO of Perimeter Bio, a commissioner on the National Security Commission on Emerging Biotechnology, a senior fellow at Harvard, and a former Marine. Hoorah! Matt, welcome. Matt, you were a Marine. You did business development at Palantir. You built Gingko's biosecurity business, and now you've spun out a new company, Perimeter. It's at a particularly unique time as well. There are headlines about hantavirus and renewed global concerns about Ebola. When you see these stories, what do business leaders and policymakers still misunderstand about biological threats?
Hey, thanks for having me, Kit. I appreciate it. Yeah, I think we can start like at a pretty high level, honestly. I think the way to think about biological threats in a digestible way is actually like to take the moment in time we're in. It's not like biological threats haven't existed on the planet for all of human history. It's like what is different about now is kind of like the key question that I think a lot about, and why we took Perimeter private to build a national security and a defense company solely focused on defending against biological threats. And the big thing that has happened, which is certainly relevant to how we're going to make goods and supply chains in the future, is kind of like around the 2015 era is really when we entered this like new age of biological engineering. And so like to put that in context, like we took a base science, which we experimented with, humans have goofed around with biology forever, but we really made it something human controllable. Like the early 1900s with chemistry, we went from like, well, we kind of understand the principles to chemical engineering. In the 30s, we did it with physics, from theoretical to practical, made all sorts of crazy stuff. And then like the computer chip in the 1950s, that's just like physics, electrical engineering, plus material science together to make the computer chip, right? And those are like these big technological moments where now humans control this like base science in a way that we can make cool products. So that has like really defined 125 years of economic expansion, those three things, and like massive economic expansion. Biology entered its moment, like the last high school science subject that we haven't made engineerable, in kind of like 2015, when we could like read all the DNA inside of cells. Cells are just like manufacturing platforms. We could write it, we could program cells, or make all sorts of cool medicines and products. But like what you have to remember is each of those periods, kind of like, I'll go even back to like when we invented the hammer. Like somebody was like, I want to build a house. This is going to be creative for humanity. And somebody else was like, I can beat somebody over the head with this. I'm going to use it as a weapon. Like the same thing happened with chemistry, physics, and the computer chip. The first applications were in warfare. And so like you like take it to its extreme. What's happening is like this acceleration of bioengineering, which is only accelerated by AI. It's on like an exponential curve of change. And so we know that there are threats coming over the horizon. It would be the anomaly in human history. We don't see more and more mistakes, more and more proactive use by bad actors of biology. So there's like a moment to really reset risk around what bio will do. And for us, it's like, well, if you're going to reset risk and you have a bunch of different implications for national security through to our economy, well, what kind of technologies do you have to build to kind of be the basket underneath that to protect us? But I think for people like listening that don't know anything about bio, like you gotta like put it in this context of why is now different. It's not just, oh, maybe there'll be another pandemic or not. No, like lifetimes, my next 50 years of my career, like it would be the anomaly in human history that we don't have significant events, largely because of the change moment in bioengineering. A long start to an answer, but like you've got to like get that in your head to say like, okay, why is this moment different? And then like, why are these things happening?
So was it bioengineering or something else that led you over the course of the last few years when you were at a large publicly traded company to say, right now is a time that biosecurity needs to be its own focus for the national security space? Why now?
Yeah, I was like seeing what was happening. Oh, by the way, like natural threats are also like massively increasing with global transit, global shipping, global air movement, with climate change, changing the environment. Like these threats are like real too. Like don't get me wrong. I just like look to the arc of it. Yeah, I don't know. For me, it was like, okay, you see bioengineering coming, and it's kind of like in the early 1990s, there was no cybersecurity industry. Nobody was like, oh, there's going to be a $280 billion industry applying these tools of computer science to defense. Like then you had the internet, and you're like, oh wait, we need this whole industry. So for me, it was like, of course, if we're going to have a massively cool bioengineered future, when I was at Gingko, which is where I started before the security side, of course you're going to need an industry to provide capabilities to like literally everybody from governments to factories to the world you live in to secure against this risk profile. And then COVID hit. And so that was like, okay, this is humanity's most recent, I've always thought about it as it's our most recent war against biology. And we have to combat it. And so we just started the business to figure out ways in the context of that heightened crazy risk environment to like use technology to mitigate that risk. And I give examples, but for me, that was like, oh, bioengineering, yes. And then you've got this like existential crisis that really gave us our founding mission to go build technology to counter these threats, whether it's a pandemic or like the more regular stuff.
And I think the cybersecurity analogy is awesome. Or, I mean, in our business, the supply chain risk is somewhat analogous, where there was a natural evolution in thinking by policymakers and corporates over time that because there are new tools, there's new capabilities to understand and really get to know a supply chain or bio or cyber or whatever it is, there's new capabilities that need to be brought in to manage and identify that type of risk. And so if I think about, for example, the supply chain world or the trade compliance world, there were all of these national security focused restrictions on businesses in those communities, but the governments were the first ones that really needed to understand how big of a problem some of this was. So for you, are government agencies, are the intelligence use cases affiliated with your technology, is that your first and primary customer base, or are corporates also starting to see why this is important?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you about what the kind of our core product is first, which will help people like understand. It's like I was, as you mentioned, I was a Marine Corps officer to start, and in like traditional defense, like kinetic defense, like you see the Andurils of the world, the Palingers of the world, what's going on in Ukraine or Iran. We have this like concept of, we have a bunch of sensors that are looking for threats. Like take missile defense in the Gulf right now. They're looking for drones. They're looking for missiles coming in from Iran. And it's an integrated platform where you see a threat, and then there's software and people that are characterizing what that threat is and automatically deciding what interceptors to send to stop that threat. Like we do that really well. We have satellite constellations all around the world for things that we like tangibly see and feel. Like to a first order approximation, our best answer today for biosurveillance or biointelligence generation is kind of like, hey, did somebody see what's going on in the Congo? Like, and somebody gets on a phone or like, oh man, how many cases? Like what? That's like literally somebody sitting in like Dubai being like, I think I see a drone coming over. Like, I'm not sure how many, right? And like it's that's stark of a difference. It's ridiculous. And so what we've like been doing for 6 years is really thinking about how do you do proactive collection at high risk locations of, think about like environmental samples. So like our flagship program is with CDC, where at 10 airports in the US, when airplanes land, we pull the wastewater directly off the tanks and we move it through a infrastructure. Software manages a workflow to a laboratory where we test it. We map everything in those samples. And then we use kind of high-end compute to analyze and return very quickly what pathogens is. is there regular stuff? Is there crazy stuff? And return that as a data feed so that risk managers on the government side can say, okay, we know this is coming in or out of the country. And then we've taken that same platform, which can sit on top of any sensor like lab, and we've put it into places like Ukraine and Qatar and Rwanda. So you're forward of borders, so you're getting early warning data collection. And we call it biothreat radar. It's not biothreat, it is actually a moniker that goes back to the 1930s, the first applications of physics. This is radar because you can tune it, you can look for different things, and then you're getting real-time data instead of somebody being like, I think somebody's sick. Can you send some dudes in suits? Which is a little bit unfair for what actually happens, but not dramatically so. And so if you think about something like that core product, biothreat radar, being deployed globally, it sounds crazy. Oh, why wouldn't we have sovereign-owned independent sensors collecting data that are interoperable? People can share when they want to share. They can share with industry. They can share with national security users. That seems like what we do in every other domain, from weather to monitoring nuclear weapons. But we just don't have it in bio. And so that's what is resonating with the national security community first, because it is an existential mission for nation states. But you can see the obvious applications in building that weather map of what's happening in different places from a supply chain perspective. So you can get, say in DRC, you get earlier warning of what's happening if you've got critical mineral supply chains or otherwise. And that unified global data feed is a massively important input over time into the intelligence picture of bio as a risk category.
It's like a commodities trader looking at a desk trying to figure out whether or not the minerals that are coming out of the DRC are going to be impacted by an Ebola outbreak. Without that type of credibility or credible intelligence on the ground, I think they're going to be in for a difficult treat. So there is a first mover advantage to having that type of intelligence, like any other intelligence.
Yeah. And think about it use the other examples that people understand. This is we think about it as biological intelligence, bioint, right? Just like we have signals intelligence, we have measurement intelligence, we have imagery intelligence. It's just another technical collection domain. By itself, it isn't the only thing you need, but it is a massively important input. The other way, if we're being nerdy for a second, there are these, it's kind of like the biological information of the planet is the last high fidelity information resource humans haven't organized and figured out how to use for decision making purposes. And it's literally everything that lives around us. It's kind of insane. So I totally agree with you from a signals perspective. That is something that is very common in the commodities world, very common in other places, and this will be an input over time, no question.
What about the moment in time that we're in, where we have all of this AI, all of this compute coming online? And if I'm thinking about all of the data affiliated with your surveillance platform coming, wastewater coming off of planes or those forward deployed stations that you have around the world, to include in Africa, looking, I presume, at the Ebola outbreak, amongst other things. Does the AI and the compute power that's come online in the last few quarters enable you to do this in a way that you couldn't previously? Is this more of a compute or a physical infrastructure problem? What's the real challenge for you as you're building and scaling this technology?
It's two things. There's the less sexy, more important part that people love to go to AI. I'll come back to AI. Super important, but we just need to do more collection of places that we're worried about. We actually have to do monitoring. Take a factor, at a high level, we talked to a bunch of large global manufacturing facilities. Well, you've got lots of employees globally going in and out of these facilities. You can measure in the wastewater of that facility, you can measure and get early warning of infectious disease outbreaks that cause massive outages. You can measure in those wastewater streams if there's illicit drug use in your factories. It's the same substrate. You're measuring the environment. And that type of information absolutely has impact on your ability to do continuity of operations, right? And so kind of step one is, or I mentioned, why aren't we collecting off of all the airplanes? That's how diseases transfer. Or shipping is the same thing, cruise ship. It's actually more boring pushing out persistent pervasive collection, but the issue why it hasn't been done is you've got to be able to drop the cost of doing it, which is what our whole platform is focused on doing, is to make it really efficient to do. And number two, be fast enough at it with smart enough analysts on the other side that you're actually providing a decision maker some sort of information within a short enough period of time they can take action on it. Because so much of historical biosurveillance or the ways that has been done is like, oh, I'll tell you 3 months later. And you're like, nobody that are your customers are like, I have 3 months to make a decision. Or a military commander's like, thanks for the 3-month-old information on this infectious disease outbreak on my ship. Like, so you've got to align, you've got to do more collection, but you've got to align it to rapid decision making, which is what we focus on, which is where AI comes in a super interesting way. I think where AI is most useful here is when you're doing that kind of end-to-end chain from collection through moving it to a sensor or a lab that can turn it into a data asset that you can interpret. There's a lot of like physics steps in there. It's like literally the physics of like collection and a truck transporting it, and how long does it have to be in this certain machine and then that certain machine. It's like not so different than, you know, like yeah, no, like literally that. So you can collapse all that time, but then when the data comes off, I mean, these are massive data files. You are sequencing and mapping all the viruses and bacteria. And so where AI has been really helpful is taking what are super high-end PhDs doing bioinformatics and comp bio, which is just like the fancy way of saying people that are really good at interpreting this biological data, and like supercharging them. So you can turn some of the foundation models on the data to interpret quickly if there's anything super dangerous in there, and just like closing that time down. It is the inverse of all the tools you read about that are making all these crazy new things. You just like flip them around and use them for defensive purposes, which is also why we can't like slow down that innovation, because like globally, no one's going to slow down trying to make things, which is going to be cool and make awesome products, also going to be very dangerous in certain areas. And so we might as well be really good at flipping them around when something does get made to interpret the bad stuff that is out there. And then the other cool thing AI does is like help really model how disease flows. So if there's an outbreak in DRC and you have enough inputs on, it's not so different than weather modeling in that sense, right? Like it's a lot of statistics and epi, but like you can actually model where will it go next. I know how these diseases flow through, so you can do predictive work, which we do a lot of how to think about, you know, you really think about how to think about risk of where next it will emerge or not emerge.
There's obviously a huge amount of national security applications just for monitoring outbreaks of standard or diseases like Ebola, right? But there's a whole separate world where adversarial control over bioengineering resources could result in some really nasty stuff being targeted against Americans and our allies. What do you see happening in that arena right now? Obviously, you're building a biological radar to collect that intelligence, but how worried should we be about foreign adversary or foreign actors using whether it's new AI models to create pathogens that they perhaps couldn't have done without that? Where's your head right now on that?
Yeah, can I start with the first one though, which is also super relevant to what's happening with reshoring of manufacturing and American allied supply chains. I think what you like for anybody thinking about broadly like the bioindustrial base, I think the biggest issue is what is the foundational component that allows us to innovate in bio? And it's really at the bottom, are we really good at genetic engineering? So like, think about all the drugs that are made. So the United States of America spends $800 billion a year on pharmaceutical products. About 48% of that, your listeners will have the exact numbers, are biotech drugs. So they're made from R&D and genetic engineering. Now, everybody thinks of biotech as a drug-based, but drugs are the only one app on genetic engineering, right? You can do things with agriculture, with materials. Think about it as apps on top of a genetic engineering industrial base, if you will, which largely historically in the US has been centered in like Cambridge and San Francisco. That industrial base has been fueled by this like circular thing where VC invests in early biotech, who then discover a drug, do a clinical trial, and then sell to big pharma. They sell, the money gets returned to VC. Drugs from big pharma get sold to US taxpayers, $800 billion a year. And then that money is cycled back in really into the genetic engineering industrial base. What's been happening over the last year and a half is that industrial base is being hollowed out because China has figured out a couple things around, yes, base R&D supply chain, but also clinical trials. And then big pharma is just buying assets from China. So like at the geopolitical level, it's competition, but at the foundational level, what that means is Cambridge and San Francisco have a big risk of starting to look like Detroit did during the auto outsourcing crises, right? And we can't let that happen, but that is what's driving the like reshoring conversation broadly. There's obviously everything from clinical trials to manufacturing to genetic engineering, R&D. But I think that is a trend that's not going to turn around. So folks that are like thinking about where supply chains are going, it is going to become, if not friendshoring, directly onshoring, because we can't be in a world 25 years from now where the best genetic engineering in the world is in an adversarial nation. We at least have to be at par. Like that's just, there should be no question about that, because I do not want to have the best cancer medicines held over my head because of some political dispute. Like that is the path we're on if we lose our competitiveness in genetic engineering. So that is one of the like bio threats, is just losing our competitiveness. So I think anybody thinking about that should be, very personal opinion, we have to make sure that we maintain competitiveness on the genetic engineering side. On the threat side, I just go back to the comment I made. It would, and it's not like fear mongering. Like I'm 43, like I got ideally somewhere between 0 and 50 more years of my career. Like it would be the anomaly in human history that we engineer a new technology that is on by the way, on an exponential curve, which really means you can't predict, the slope of the line changes too fast. You can't predict how, this is where my head is, you can't predict what will be made and how it will be made, because bioengineering is going like this, accelerated by AI. So you have to build resilience to be able to respond to the things that happen. And the uniqueness about bio being used is it's not just the like, oh, I'm going to make a plague that's going to kill everybody. It's uniquely suited for use in low-grade areas layered with misinformation and disinformation. So it's going to be very hard, unless you have exquisite monitoring and biointelligence generating capabilities. It's going to be very hard to pin it on a specific state actor or a rogue actor. That's the attribution problem, which DOW is working really hard to think about. And we all have the example of failure of attribution, because we still disagree over whether this was a lab leak or not in Wuhan. To me, that's the single biggest intelligence failure, not since 9/11, which is actually a hard problem, but since 1941, when we failed to trust regular radar with planes coming across the Pacific. And so where my head is like, we know threats are coming. They are going to, the bio will be used. It would literally, we've used nukes. Like somebody is going to use this as these capabilities exist. It is unlikely, in my opinion, to be something like, from a state actor, like global and catastrophic. It is much more likely to be layered with the types of things that disrupt economies, disrupt supply chains, impose significant costs to geopolitical adversaries, and can't be, unless we make exquisite collection capabilities, can't be pinned back on a specific actor, so they can't be held accountable, or certainly in the public's eye can't be pinned back on a specific actor. So I worry more about the economic disruption, the like, call it gray wars usage of bio over the next 50 years than I do like something like massively catastrophic. The other thing I do worry about is just as like accelerating innovation happens, people are just going to try more things. It's like nation states aren't going to slow down in their use of AI and bio. And so there will be mistakes. There will be mistakes like we've seen across. And I think the push to try to govern and monitor laboratories that are doing dangerous things is like really important, because we know that humans have error, especially in bio, and the more research that's going on, the higher probability that something will happen. But again, that has primarily impacts on like how our globally integrated economy works.
It reminds me to a certain degree, post 9/11, when there was huge policymaker concern about rogue terrorist groups collecting the necessary technology and components to get nuclear material or WMD material for rat-hardened bombs or dirty bombs. And there's now a world where non-state actors or other just criminals that have this type of motivation to use the tools that are publicly available to be able to engineer some of these bioweapons that hopefully you're able to identify and collect. Well, so that leads me. Oh, go ahead.
Well, this is really important. So, like for everybody to think about it, it's like simple architecture. It's like you've got to do better collection and detection to catch things you can. And there's different classes of actors. There's state actors. There's the non-state actors. There's rogue actors. That's not going to catch everything by definition, right? Like it is going to miss things. You have other intelligence collection that can help you with those individual actors otherwise that we're pretty good at. But then second, you have to be able, this is where the supply chains come in, where actually rapid manufacturing comes in, where R&D comes in. You have to be able to respond really quickly when something does happen. So we have to keep investing in that. And then you need resilience. You've got to be able to, like, when something does happen, you have to communicate to the public. You have to be able to operate through these degraded environments, just like we operate through degraded cyber environments. Like the F-35, if like the computers go out, it's built theoretically to be able to operate through cyber events. So it can be resilient. It is as like that third category, but it's detection, its response, and its resilience. We have to do all three of those in bio. It's just like my view is like we're so far behind on the kind of global detection and identification problem that we are going to miss more things than we should be missing.
So what should policymakers focus on? There's been obviously recent news about Anthropic's model being cut off due to cybersecurity risks because it's gotten so good at detecting exploitable vulnerabilities within global cyber infrastructure networks. I could certainly see a world where something similar happens for bio, but what do you think are the one or two key things that policymakers in the United States or in allied democracies around the world should be thinking about?
Yeah, I love it. So it's starting to happen. So taking that same architecture, like biothreat detection, biothreat radar, response, and resilience, kind of in that first category, it is starting to happen. So started in the Biden administration, President Trump branded this major initiative within CDC, but then also it's moving over to DOW and other places called biothreat radar. And what he's doing with that is essentially trying to push CDC and other agencies back to an infectious disease monitoring mission, but with a technology first lens, not to get into like the massive politics of it, but like, look, we left WHO. I think you talk to a lot of people, if you take the politics out of it, we founded WHO in 1948 to do infectious disease outbreak detection and coordination. And it's a political body that did its best when we didn't have technology, but it failed. It failed in COVID to give us early warning. It's having a tough time in DRC. Doesn't mean it shouldn't exist, in my opinion, but it doesn't have a technical foundation. So the US government with its allies pushing for a much more national security oriented technology first global detection system that can then feed into friends and allies and globally into multilateral institutions. I think we have to do that. It is like we went from the U-2 to look at Soviet nukes to a global satellite constellation when that was the threat. We have to do the same thing. And I think that is moving. There's a bunch of work with the CDC's Biothreat Radar Initiative, with State Department funding these big programs, which obviously did critical minerals funding too, but they're funding programs globally with repurposed USAID money to align more and more around biothreat detection and health systems response. So I think that's good, but I would push the government to keep thinking about this like an intelligence collection discipline that we need to be technically first in. And then second, it is this supply chain stuff, which Todd Young and NSCB led to really think about how do we make sure that we aren't reliant on other nations for critical medicines? How do we bring biomanufacturing either onshore or friendshore and do so in smart ways, not just like we don't need to just dump a ton of money on it. Actually, we're the only country in the world that spends for innovative drugs. We just make rules, right? Like the US taxpayer is not going to buy drugs unless they're made in the US. I love that. I think it's a great idea. It's a simple regulatory fix to what doesn't need to be a massive new like dump of $2 trillion to force a supply chain to work. You just say we're the only ones that pay for this, and we're only going to pay for it if it is made here. And so I think really being smart about how we spend our money on the only app that works, medicines, will bring those supply chains home. And then we won't be reliant in 20 years or 10 years on fancy drugs from somebody who's at least a geopolitical competitor, who has shown the willingness to use different levers to influence us, and we don't want our medicines to be used that way. So I'd say those two things: one, much more proactive collection and preparation for the biological threats, and then being smart about reshoring, but by using the levers we do have, which is actually our massive spending on drugs.
Amen and amen. Matt, it's been awesome to have you on. Last question. What's the favorite book that you've read recently?
I love it. Okay, my favorite book of the last 5 years is a book called Tuxedo Park by Jenna Bryant Conant. It is about a guy named Alfred Loomis who left Wall Street right before the crash, founded a private physics laboratory because he was just like into the cutting edge of physics. And ultimately, he was the one that brought together pre-Manhattan Project, all the young academics that were physicists. They would do a summer study. They started researching radar. His lab in Tuxedo Park, New York, was then nationalized in World War II to become the MIT Rad Lab. They started launching the first radar systems out of Logan Airport in Boston. It wasn't called Logan then, to look for U-boats. Our perimeter headquarters is right across the harbor from Logan Airport. We're building biothreat radar. It's like a lot of inspiration for why we changed it to be a biothreat radar instead of something else, because you're actually building systems. And it's one of the coolest books of like an arc of story and history about a really amazing group of people that saved the West.
Incredible. Awesome recommendation. Thanks, Matt, for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Kit.
History can teach us many things. When we started this conversation, we mentioned the Cold War, a moment when we as a country and an alliance network decided that seeing a threat early was worth the investment. What strikes me about this conversation is that we're at that moment again. The threat just looks different. It doesn't arrive on a traditional radar screen. It moves silently through global trade and supply chains. But the lesson still holds. The company and the country that can see it first has the advantage. Matt, thanks for the work you're doing to build that early warning layer and for walking us through it today. To everyone listening, the next disruption to the things we depend on may not announce itself with a tariff or a headline. It may already be moving. The question is whether we'll be able to see it coming. Thank you for joining us on the Exiger Exchange today. Do us a favor, subscribe and share this with someone who needs to hear it. We'll see you next time for another unfiltered conversation with the experts moving markets and nations.